Hi, I'm Anna Miller. I'm a sophomore here at EMHS. This is another chapel. Today I will be interviewing Leland Brenneman and Byron Brenneman. Yeah, so they both worked in mission work, and so can you guys give an explanation of what you did?
Sure, I'd be glad to. I graduated from EMHS in 1970, by the way. So it was a good year at EMHS. But what I've done in the sort of the missions field is different things. But I primarily worked in development, community development, and emergency relief. And I started working with Mennonite Central Committee, and then I moved on to other organizations and did most of my work with World Vision International. But a lot of the work was, like I said, had to do with feeding hungry people, setting up feeding centers, and also doing a lot of designing of projects so people could become more self-sufficient. Byron?
Okay, so I graduated from EMHS in 1976, and so on a gap year between high school and college, I went to the Bronx in New York City, and that's where I really got a heart for missions and for that kind of work. And so, but then that's led to being in the Bronx for many years. That's where I found my wife and had all my kids. And then we moved to, about 20 years ago, we moved to Beijing. And so we were doing business as missions and charity work with special needs orphans, where we would take orphans into bring them into the city, capital city, Beijing, and provide them surgeries, and then would help them get adopted. So that was a brief synopsis of what I've done since I've left Eastern Mennonite High School. I guess it's EMS now. So
yeah,
that's my life.
That was a lot. Anyways, what was your guys' original plan after you left EMHS?
My plan, frankly, was to get out of the Shenandoah Valley and to have some adventure. So I wasn't very strategic, but I did end up going to Goshen College for a couple of years. But as soon as I had an opportunity, I went overseas. First with Goshen College on one of their little semesters to Honduras, and then I joined Mennonite Central Committee. Didn't even have a college degree. Back then, you could do some of that stuff. So I just went off for over 2 years. No internet, no communication back and forth, except letters, and just had a wonderful time in Bolivia for a couple of years. And that's what got me sort of launched into the world of international missions.
I also was signed up to go to Goshen College, but then I took this gap year between EMHS and Goshen College, and that's when I ended up in New York City in the Bronx, and that totally changed the direction of my life. So I did, what I was planning to do when I left school, I ended up kind of going a totally different direction. Yeah.
So what originally called you to missions, and like what really made you want to do it? I guess Byron, you already touched on it. You wanted the Bronx or whatever, but you can say it again.
Okay. Well, what really, actually, it was when I went to EMHS, I lived in the dorm, and I had a dorm counselor who had a pretty big impact in my life. And he had actually moved to New York City, and he's the one that sent me this invitation, this brochure to this school of ministry that they had during the summer there in the Bronx. And so I went to that, and that's where I suddenly I had a heart for the poor and the broken, and because in that particular time the Bronx was kind of like it was a war zone, gangs and a lot of drugs and prostitution and things like that, things that I'd never ever encountered in the Shenandoah Valley. But my heart was just open to that that part of the need, and so that's what just it grabbed my heart, and it's probably was instrumental in the direction that I've taken since then.
And I think my story is somewhat similar, just going in different directions. But I think EMHS provided a kind of an introduction to a life of service. I think as this chapel that you're doing now introduces students to persons who have taken this path, back then the same thing happened. We were exposed to speakers. We were exposed to teachers that were missions oriented, and the Mennonite Church played a big role. And I reference Mennonite Central Committee again. They just provided opportunities for young people, and they still do, and it's wonderful. And it's a wonderful thing for you young people to take advantage of. It's a real blessing, and it clearly is what, even though I wasn't very strategic, I didn't really have things planned out very well. I did know that I wanted to spend time helping those who are downtrodden and dealing with some of those issues. And in my case, and Byron, at an international level.
So our chapel theme, sorry, my dog. Our chapel theme is belonging. And so did you ever have a sense of like, is this really what God called me to do? And if so, what helped you like overcome that feeling? And if not, like what reassured you like, yes, this is like my placement? Yeah.
Go ahead, Byron.
Well, I think I got a pretty dramatic calling while I was at EMHS, and it had to do with the friends and the community that I had there living in the dorm. And this one particular dorm counselor was, like I said, was pretty instrumental. And then I think that through the circumstances that followed, it was just clarified that I just want to give my life to this kind of service. And it certainly went a direction that I didn't expect. I would have, if you would have asked me back when I had left high school and was there in the Bronx in New York City, what kind of life I would live, I would thought I would have been like full-time in sort of the traditional mission work. But it ended up being business as missions. And so both in New York City and in Beijing, the core of our work was around business. And under that umbrella, we would do charity and things. And and there was times when that kind of got confusing, but people helped me understand that there's no difference between, doing good business and also doing good ministry, that there's really not a separation, that they both walk hand in hand. So yeah, that's my story.
Yes, and I think in my case, again, I didn't always have things planned out, but doors opened at the right time for me to continue to pursue my work in overseas missions. And I took advantage of those. And then at some point, it seemed like my family needed to come back to the United States. My children were getting a little older. And so that was a little bit of a confusing time because my heart was still out there. And then it all worked out. I ended up having probably another 20 years of being able to do a lot of short-term assignments, in my case for World Vision. and was able to get, in that context, was able to get all over the place and provide services to their programs around the world.
Yeah, so during your missions, like you guys probably have some crazy stories. I don't know, but if you wanted to share any.
Yeah, I mean, I have lots of stories, and you probably heard a few of them. So I don't. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to summarize it too much. I mean, I've had some very. I went to Afghanistan a number of times, just to get specific, after 9/11, and I would have some pretty wild times there. And one of my trips out of the capital city, Kabul, to a place that had just experienced an earthquake, and I had to go through this tunnel called I think it's called the Salang Tunnel through the Hindu Kush Mountains. And just as we were in the tunnel, all the traffic stopped because there was like a blizzard and a snowstorm. And so I was trapped inside that tunnel. And it was kind of scary because the motors were running. And so they needed to get everyone to turn their engines off so we wouldn't suffocate. And so I remember being very frightened and getting out of my vehicle and walking along this tunnel in the complete darkness, trying to get to the other end, which I finally did. So I'm here to tell the story. But World Vision actually published sort of a story about it, and they call it the Tunnel of Terror. And I was the sort of the main character in that story that they published. So that's one story, Anna.
Yeah.
Wow. What about you, Byron?
Well, there's, I mean, everybody has a story. And I guess the one that was, closest to my high school years was when I was in the Bronx in New York City. And I just loved this inner city ministry. It was amazing, fantastic. And then, and I had to manage these apartment buildings to make a living. And it's a pretty rough neighborhood. And, one of the apartments, there was like small apartment, but there's 3 guys and they had 3 women that they were living with and a whole bunch of kids. And I went into that apartment, said, look, you can't all be living here. And one guy walked back into the back room, comes out with a big knife, and he says, we'll live here if we want to. And if you cause us any trouble, we'll take care of you. Well, I'm just this little kid from Virginia. And so I back out of that apartment, and a week or 2 later, I met the one guy in the hallway and he wanted to pay me rent. These guys are just like crazy guys. And I said, no, you got to, give me a check or something. I don't take cash. He said, oh, take cash, take cash. I took it. And then I was knocked over the head with something hard. I was knocked unconscious. I was knocked out for about a half hour. And, they robbed me and took everything that was on me. And I was one of the tenants, rescued me. This lady rescued, she pulled me into her apartment and called the police. And so the police were there. And anyway, as they were taking me to the hospital, these guys, because I told the police that they had done this to me, they said, we're going to kill you, you're dead. And anyway, so I ended up living. I'm still here to tell the story, but those were some pretty scary times in the Bronx many years ago. So it's not quite as exciting as an Afghan tunnel, but it was pretty dramatic for me.
Wow. Anyways, so how did going to EMHS impact your work and what you did? I know you touched on you felt like it really led you to service, it has so many opportunities and stuff.
Yes, and I would just expand on that to say that in addition, I think I mentioned some of the teachers and some of the speakers and whatnot, but we also did service projects. I don't know if you guys still do that or not, but I remember going to West Virginia. I even went on some little mission thing all the way to Florida one time. So instead of, having a nice spring break, we would go down and do little programs in churches and whatnot. So EMHS clearly had that focus, and that had an impact. But I would also say something about the academics, because a lot of things that I have done sort of on the international scene have required strong writing and computing skills, computing in the sense of just old-fashioned mathematics. And I think going to a place like EMHS that emphasized some of those skills served me very well. If I had to do it again, I would take typing class more seriously, and I would take my Spanish classes more seriously. So I had to pick up those skills post EMHS. But it's a good school. You're lucky to be there.
Yeah, I would just ditto what my big brother said, and again, some of the friends and classmates that I had there deeply impacted my life, and so I think the part of it is just taking advantage of those relationships that you have no idea where they will lead. And for me, it led me to New York City, where I met my wife, had my kids. It was sort of like the launching from childhood into adulthood, from youth into adulthood. Very impactful.
So you guys are both in the United States now. Are you like keeping up with your projects overseas, or like what led you back and stuff?
Well, I go ahead.
Well, I was just saying, I came back a couple of years ago and from China, and I haven't been able to return because of COVID and some other things. But things continue in China with the charity and with the business. And but we're doing it from a distance to do a lot of like Zoom calls and WeChat calls and so on. But Leland.
Yeah, and in my case, I just kind of grew older and am somewhat retired from doing some of the more formal work that I was doing with World Vision. But in these years, we're focusing on another project, and we've started a small organization called Grassroots Heroes International. It's a faith-based organization, and we focus on a couple of communities in Africa, Southern Africa. So that's been very exciting, and we're heavily involved in those projects, which include education, includes livelihoods, and spiritual inputs to especially the young people who need those inputs and who need role models. And so that's been an exciting part of my life as I grow a little older.
All right, thank you so much for letting me interview you. Hope you have a great day. I don't know. Yeah.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you, Anna. You've made my day great.
Yes.